I know like a lot of my students, for them, this jump to live their life, and they decide because they want to, they said, that's enough. Now this is my chapter. I want to start something new. And I always dreamt of going abroad. I'm really in awe with like the boldness and the courage that takes.
If you've ever stood at a French prefecture window and completely froze, then this conversation today is for you. My guest today is Déborah Pham Van Xua. I'm trying to pronounce it the French way. You said that people pronounce it in France. She is the founder of Feel Good French. And we're going to talk about a lot today about the psychology of language learning, dealing with expat stress, and how to actually function in real world France. Deborah, it's really nice to meet you.
Bonjour, Brendan. Thank you so much. Merci for having me today, inviting me to your beautiful YouTube channel. And well, I hope I can be useful to your audience and the listeners. And I'm really happy to speak about this very important topic: the language, the French language, the integration, the cultural differences, and everything related to the expatriation in France.
Excellent. Well, let's dive in. First of all, what is Feel Good French? Who do you primarily serve? Is it expats, students, retirees? And what problem would you say that you're actually solving with most people?
So Feel Good French, it's a language school that I created. It's been about now 2 years. So I've been teaching French. I'm really terrible with the years, but now I realize it's been, I think, 15 years
Wow.
Because I've been living abroad, and I taught French from abroad in different countries all around the world, even in China. I know that your wife is from China, so I taught even in China, in a lot of different countries. And so myself, I've also been an expat like you, a lifelong expat, and I always loved traveling, exploring, like shading and rebuilding my identity in different countries. And I love my job because I'm a little bit, it's teaching French, but for foreigners. So I don't teach French. I never taught French for French people, but I like this to deal with people who are actually, they want to speak the language either because they want to move to France, or because they just love the language and they are interested by, the cultural aspect, to see life through a new window, basically, new expressions, and to see the enthusiasm of those learners. That's something that I've been doing like for a long time now. But in the most recent years, I decided to only teach online, with the pandemic, and things went a little bit this way. And I was at first teaching for other people, till the point where I decided that I wanted to set my own business. I had like this entrepreneurship desire in me. And I was like, okay, now it's time. And all I knew at the beginning is that I wanted to teach with some sort of well-being aspect, to work as a language coach, to work, with the mindset, to work, something that will go a little bit beyond the language. Like there will be, of course, the language part, because that's who I am. I'm a teacher, but I wanted to, to go a little bit deeper and mix it, to be little bit at the crossroad with well-being, because I'm really, for me, it's really important because of my past, and like my past as well, like my life trajectory. I'm someone that's quite resilient, and I've been through a lot, and I actually have a little bit of a spiritual journey as well. And I'm into meditation. I'm also a yoga instructor, and I wanted to a little bit mix everything. And I didn't know at first to who I would, teach the famous niche, till the niche came to me. At some point, someone knocked my door, and it was a 50-plus learner from the US that moved to France, and she never learned any French before. And it was a real struggle for her. And she had all this added layer of stress, the integration. And I could see that for her, French was an added difficulty, but she had to go through it. So I was like, actually, she's like kind of the perfect student for me because I felt that I could provide her all this support that goes a little bit beyond the language itself. And that's how I decided to come to your question to specialize in teaching French for older learners. So I don't have like a specific age in mind. So often I say 50 plus learners, but it's basically people who, like their rhythm, it's a little bit like they take things a little bit slower. There is a little bit less retention, like things can go a little bit slower, and they need a really safe space to learn. Like I find that with the students, like we work a lot on really taking our time, feeling confident, no judgment, but creating this space to learn without stress and with a little bit of, la joie, the joy of learning and cultivating this aspect and grounding the learning into very practical situation in France. Like we kind of take a little bit of shortcuts. We don't do like, the typical, all the grammatical steps that we would see with, I just took a grammar book just to show you. Of course,
I've seen that book.
It's kind of a famous
right.
book that's progressive. It's actually a good book. But yeah, the idea for me is I've developed a method for my students to really, I'm aware often my students, they are aware as well that they won't become fluent and achieve like this C2 level of French. But what they want is to be able to, as you mentioned, what was your example at the beginning? To go to the administration or
go to the prefecture,
prefecture,
being able to deal with something that's more involved than, je prends un café au lait, s'il vous plaît.
Yeah. So, those situations that sometimes
right.
maybe people before moving, they kind of, they didn't think that would be so important. And maybe in Paris where you are, a lot of people speak English, but it is true that older generation in France, often maybe they don't really speak any English or in the country or in smaller places. And you need the basic sentences to be able to, have a good command or like handle situations like this. And it could also be like something as easy as receiving a delivery, and having to deal in the interphone with the delivery people, all the situations that could bring a bit of stress. Dealing with that. And another aspect, connecting with the people, those these French typical sentences, structure that could help you to create the bridge and to feel that that you are bonding with the French people and you live beyond this expat bubble. And so it's the two aspects that I'm really focusing on, surviving in France and thriving, this is the name of one of the course I'm developing right now, like survive and thrive in France, to have those two aspects, and trying to be as efficient as possible to kind of, make things as easy as possible, even though we won't necessarily go really, really deep into some grammatical points, but we will give you, what is the most important structures, sentences, like the pronunciation parts that's really important for you to be able to have a good life, une bonne vie.
I really resonate with this. I've talked about this in some other videos. I spent many years learning Chinese and not writing so much, not reading and writing, but just really oral communication to be able to function, get around, and really just to be able to be socially respectful and polite and interact with people, and to be able to function on my own from leaving my door to getting where I'm going and getting inside. Pimsleur worked very well for me. And part of why I felt like it worked was, of course, it's oral practice. You're listening and repeating. For people who haven't done it, you're listening to this conversation and then you're repeating the things, and it's explained to you in English if you're listening to the English version teaching you. So you understand the situation, then you go through both sides, and then you practice. And there's spaced windows to practice, and they're very common situations. It's structured in a way that it's practical situations. Like you're going to need to go in this shop and ask where something is. You're going to need to talk to this person with the taxi, and how much does it cost, and get your change and say thank you and goodbye. Very practical stuff.
Yeah.
And so I appreciated that versus just sort of abstract learning to learn conjugation tables for verbs. So your core philosophy, I'm curious how you would articulate it. I mean, to me, it's not just about grammar and vocabulary. It sounds like you're a bit more focused on also giving people confidence, to me, dealing with the nervous system reactions of the person, framing that within the context of the culture. That's really important.
Exactly.
How do you, it sounds like that's how you sort of approach it.
Yeah, that made me think that there is a lot of reason to learn a language, like some people do it because they are they love the languages, and they just, they are 20 years old and they just want to learn, a new language. And then maybe they will want to go in depth and like do all those grammatical parts, and that one matters for them. But it's true, like, I am dealing, and I think the two of us, we have a little bit the same kind of audience in our YouTube channel. We are dealing a little bit with the same kind of people. Maybe we have just a recent expatriation project. So maybe they haven't started learning French, or they're kind of new to the language, but they really need the language for their project. So here the intention is to learn fast, and fast in a way like to learn a very practical French that could help them to really to integrate in their life. And I like that you mentioned the nervous system, because what I noticed, the more I was dealing with my students, I have a lot of students that did like immersion courses, like there are places where you can go and learn, like, you did that?
Says A1 intensive. Yeah.
You did 10 days, or how long?
No, it's 1 month. 1 month.
1 month. Okay.
And it was great, but please continue.
Yeah. So I have people who've been doing those kind of courses, and they came to me saying like that they felt that they didn't learn much, that they couldn't. It was like the rhythm was quite intense, and yes, they covered everything, all the basics, for instance, of A1 level were covered, but they felt that they didn't retain much, and they got a little bit, their confidence got a little bit shaken, and they feel like they feel stress. They feel stress about speaking even to the baker à la boulangerie. They have this idea, they want to do it, but they have all those layers of stress. They feel that maybe they will be judged, or so I think here it's also from my experience as well as an expat like you, I noticed that when you first move to a country, often it takes a little time to adjust and for you to feel safe in this new environment. So I find that when you move to another country, when you move to France, maybe it depends on the people. Some people are adapt like super fast, but maybe for some people, the sensitive souls, and maybe people need a bit of time to, to arrive. And even if they love France and they love everything about the country, maybe just to kind of also adjust if they never move abroad, if it's their first experience, to kind of feel, okay, here I am, I'm safe, and learning the language, it shouldn't be a source of stress, it should be a source of enthusiasm. I will take the challenge, I will go, I will practice those lines, I will I know now the common verbs that they will say, and to go with this kind of learner spirit, and the curiosity. And I know for some people, especially when you learn later in life, to accept to be a beginner, un débutant, sometimes it's hard. I'm always a beginner in everything I do, and I have this curiosity myself to always start something new. But I know that for some people, it's a difficult position to accept. It's very humbling. You said humbling, like makes you humble.
Yes, definitely.
So definitely. Yeah, I think that's why, like, working on the mindset, working on, kind of rewiring rewiring your brain to, instead of connecting the French language to the stress, those moments where your heart races, and suddenly you feel like you are going to be judged, that they are going to be impatient, and just to try to rewire the brain to feel that and work, in your house, to start to work on first to have, if you have a one-to-one class, you can create this safe space, but then also to create that in your own house, to practice the sentences, to repeat as you did with Pimsleur, to, use your mouth like the gymnastic. This really helps, to just say out loud. And even if you sound silly and you feel a bit silly at home by yourself, to just, go into your daily activity and to just say, je me brosse les dents, to repeat out loud. You sound silly, but it's first practice to help you in this moment where you are going to freeze. Usually you freeze when you want to speak, but if you have this mouth gym at home where you speak and you are not scared to speak out loud, and even you record yourself to see your progress, and you repeat. I think that is very important. And yeah, so that's why I think it's kind of almost a holistic approach where we, we learn the language, and everything is taking in consideration, like your environment, how you feel, how you wire your brain. And
I love that you framed it as a holistic issue, because I mean, everyone is different. Everyone's experience is going to be different. But I'm curious, in your experience, maybe what is the number one issue that you see that blocks expats in France with speaking? Do you think it's like the language mechanics, confidence, culture shock, like administrative overwhelm, perfectionism, fear of judgment? What do you think is maybe the biggest factor, if you could isolate it?
Every learner is different. It's amazing to see the variety. Like some people, and I always try to valorize, to value people for what they are good at, because it's amazing. Sometimes they feel terrible because they can't understand something, but then I'm like, your pronunciation is so good. Like you just, you hear it once, and the people, you said that you are a musician yourself. Usually the musician, people who can sing, they are really good at with pronunciation. They don't have any difficulties with that. I think every learner is different, but for this specific niche of older learner, I think the pronunciation is kind of difficult at the beginning, to recognize the sound with la liaison, the way we connect words. Oui. That's something you learn at the beginning, and you freak out because you're like,
absolutely. I didn't know what it was called. I just knew that certain things got run together.
Yeah. Well, I often say, like, think of, I like to kind of depaint French as, this kind of playful or romantic language. And I'm like, liaison, it's like the affair, and it's like the two words that comes together. Why? Because there is this care for the melody, and the language it sounds better. We don't like it without the liaison. It sounds dull. So we put this liaison, and okay, it's hard because it's all together, and it's far from there is a big gap between the way you read it and the way you say it. But this complexity makes it special. And yes, it's a bit harder, but that, for instance, something that I do often is that I put with color code, I put the final letter. There is a lot of silent final letter. So I put them in another color. So I say to my students, like, sometimes we are, the written French is deceiving because, we are very visual people nowadays. We are in a visual societies. No, we are, most of us, we, maybe not you as a musician, but you are in visual art. So you must be
I'm a filmmaker too. So I kind of have both things going, but I get your point.
But because we are visual, like we rely on what we see. And so people often, and it's the same for me with English. If I see, for instance, the word chocolate, I want to say chocolate because I see, the three syllab. But it's in French, I'm trying to kind of write in a special way. I also write the pronunciation à l'oreille, the way that our ear perceive it. And I say to my students, forget the way it's spelled, listen to me, and if you want, read like this gibberish language, because often they don't know the phonetics. So I just write the pronunciation à l'oreille, and they can see, and suddenly they can pronounce it perfectly. At first, they were unable to say the word with the liaison, with the combination of letters. But if I found those, I would call it the shortcut, or those bridges, where they could relate to, to English language, they relate to this very sound because there is this English word that sounds the same. Suddenly it becomes easier. And then it sticks to the head. I think that's one of the points I notice, and that's why they want a teacher, because often maybe only the app or the method that they use to self-learn is not enough. They need like those kind of explanation and like live practice to see if they are okay with their pronunciation. And so I think that's very important part, especially at the beginning, like the moment. And it's good to take good habits for pronunciation at the beginning, I found. Because otherwise the mistakes in French we say fossilize, like a rock that stays. And when you take bad habits at the beginning, it's really hard to change them later.
From learning Chinese has a system called pinyin, which is the way that you use like Roman characters to write something. And like, so I can actually send people messages where they see Chinese. When I was at Alliance Française, I found myself doing the same thing to get the pronunciation, where I was writing my phonetic version. There was a program that was popular for when we were learning English as a kid, which was called Hooked on Phonics. It was this course about learning phonetics, and Hooked on Phonics was anyone who's roughly my age from the US probably remembers this course. And it was a very popular teaching method. In my case, I would learn all these basics, and because I was practicing with Pimsleur, and I guess because I have a musician's ear, my pronunciation was considered really good. And so I would get into these situations in China all the time where I would know how to say the basic chit chat, the first 3 or 4 or 5 exchanges in a social context, or, and then someone would say something and I have no idea what they said. I have no idea. So I have no idea how to reply. And so I would totally freeze. And I would get to a point where I would tell them in what sounds like perfect foreigner Chinese, I'm sorry, but I don't speak Chinese. But I just said it in what sounds like really, really good Chinese. So they're very confused. And with French specifically, I know how to ask for clarity or for someone to speak slowly. Immigrants, expats, foreigners, we often freeze up when we don't know the words. What's actually happening in like the brain and the body at that moment when people freeze, in your observation?
Yeah, I mean, it happened to me when I was 18 years old. I was the typical French person learning languages at school, and being feeling full of shame. I think the first emotion is the shame because of my pronunciation, shame of opening my mouth and just like voicing what I could say, or shame of not knowing the right conjugation, not knowing the right word. And there is a lot of I find, and it's interesting because you mentioned as well that you like things in connection with spirituality or meditation, and I find for me it was a lot of rigidity in my head. It was like, for instance, you want to say something, and also it's in connection with the love for the language, because I love my language, and from a very young age I was always like into literature, and I like the accuracy. There is no synonym. It's like one word is one word. And so when I wanted to speak, at first it was in Spanish, because I don't know at what, maybe 20 years old, I went to live in Valencia in Spain for 6 months. And I just remember being so stubborn, and I was freezing because I wanted the perfect translation from my beautiful French idea that I have in my head. And I think the moment where I started to become fluent is this moment where you have your idea and you decide to travel around the idea and go fishing for the words that would be closer, and you develop this kind of flexibility, and then you become you become good at, not only good at languages, but good at communication, because you realize that, yes, you got an idea, and maybe it won't be as accurate as it would be in your mother tongue, but it will be something else. And it will be actually also because sometimes there is no translation, and also because the different cultural factor, like for instance in Spain, people utilize imperative. You know, when I start using the conditional at the market, they used to tell me, "Hey, you speak like the queen." But you know, in French, we use the conditional in French. We use the je voudrais, and it's quite. We have a lot of form. So if you are still in the US or abroad and you come to France, you will be maybe surprised by the amount of formalities that we have, you know, even in the bureaucracy, in the restaurant. When you write letters, there are very heavy politeness phrases that kind of are very old school. Like they sound really strange, very dated. But yeah, there is this, there is a good level of formality, and you see it. The first thing you see when you go to France is how people apologize in the street. They always say, pardon, excusez-moi. And it's because there is this kind of, I find, that's what I find in comparison with when I'm abroad, is like, in France, there is a decent amount of formality. I don't know if you find that when you move to Paris.
It's something that we've talked about it. I've talked about it a lot. The level of formality. You know, occasionally we get comments on some videos when I do something that's about integration of life, and a common theme is, you know, basically, are French people rude or are Parisians rude, et cetera, et cetera. And depending on the way the question's worded, I answer with the context. But what I always say is like, no, there's a certain expectation of formality. I mean, I understand other French people's perception of Parisians, you know, so I understand that they would largely say yes, but it's more, you know, rude is a shorthand for other things, you know, snobby or elite or something. But I have context for it, you know, having lived in a lot of really big cities. I've lived in Los Angeles. I've lived in Beijing. So to me, you know, Paris is just another major world city. People are in a hurry. They have places to go and things to do. And you're probably in their way if you're standing around in the middle of the street and don't know where you're going or what you're doing.
And the most touristic city as well is that's one of the reasons. When you ask where is the cinema, or to a Parisian, he heard that so many times, maybe even during the day. So it's to be taken in consideration as well. That is very touristic.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so for me to sort of finish answering your question, you know, I feel I was only surprised in how much I had been conditioned to expect it, and how accurate that is. And I'm originally from the southern United States, and one of the characteristics for people who don't know is, I mean, we tend to be overly chatty. And hey, how are you doing? Like you walk in the store, we're being from the southern US, we're used to walking in saying, hey, how are you doing? How's your day? We're used to like some little polite chit chat at the beginning and the end of whatever the transaction is. So I'm already wired to walk in and say bonjour, and if it's a place where I know them, you know, bonjour, ça va? Bien, bien, bien. You know, I'm used to walking in and not just saying hello, but how are you doing? Things are good, and whatnot. And you know, when we end, it's a little more. It's not just, you know, au revoir, bonne journée, or whatever. It's à la prochaine, à la prochaine, bye bye, and then. Typically the stores where people know me and I interact, they always want to, if they have a little English, they'll usually throw in like a bye-bye or a hello. They'll throw in a little English into the conversation, sort of as like a courtesy thing to me. Yeah. And so not uptight at all, but until you know those people, it's very by the book, and don't expect people to become your best friend. You know, be polite, show respect, say the appropriate hello for time of day, and take a beat, you know, pause. And then make your request. It's not hello. It's not hello. I want 3 baguettes. It's
exactly
hello. hello. And I've, practicing the acting a lot. I am acculturated enough to understand the social context for the day-to-day things. Talking about stress, let's talk a little bit about bureaucracy. And our pregame before we did this interview, and we emailed and chatted before we started rolling for the people here, we talked about some of the things that make learning French and being in France really stressful for immigrants, foreigners, expats. French administration has to be the one. That's the place where I myself, I'm comfortable attacking it at this point, just because I have to. There's so many things to do, so many government office type interchanges that you have to do, that I prepare ahead of time. I look up what I expect the exchange will be, and I translate it, and I practice what I'm going to say. I get familiar with what the different answers will be, so I have some context for listening out in case there's an unfamiliar word in the situation. What do you think makes, like, dealing with the administrative aspect of life in France, what do you think makes that uniquely stressful for English speakers? Is it like the uncertainty, the speed? That's a big one for me, because French people speak as fast as I speak like this when I'm confident. The tone, the authority tone.
First, I think you've got a really good method. So I think people could get inspired by what you do. Like, take things kind of avec du sang-froid, with cold blood. Like, not to have emotions, but say, okay, this is something that needs to be done. So let's take things like calmly. Maybe use also nowadays with the internet and with the intelligence artificial, like you could have like little, like you could ask, okay, I have to deal with this very task, with the renewal of my visa or whatever. What typical sentences could come up? What typical answers should it be? And you could like calmly and also ask for the pronunciation, what we mentioned à l'oreille, because to have the written sentences, if you don't know how to pronounce it at the beginning, that's not going to work for you, but also to have the sentences the way that you can understand how to say it and how to recognize it as well. Because when we speak of languages, like there is different skills. There is like the skill of how you speak, but also the listening, and so it's like different skills that you are going to work on. And some people are better, as we mentioned before. Some people could be good at one thing and not so good at the other thing. So it's like also working on these different aspects. But as you do to get ready to face different situations and to know the keywords, and you'll be really happy, at least when you are in this interaction, that you recognize the keywords that you saw before, and you are not completely lost, and that could become your anchor, like something that grounds you, and okay, right now we are speaking about this aspect of the visa renewal. Okay, up. But
so I'm listening for words like, if the issue is about providing some kind of a certain document before a certain date, I'm keyed in to the name of that document and the date and what the issues might be about getting that document. And so I've already rehearsed that. It's in my brain. And I may not know the perfect way to say it, but I know what I'm asking and I know what I'm hoping to hear about. So I'm really keying in on those specific words. At least they might get there in a way that ChatGPT didn't prep me, but I know what I'm listening for.
Exactly, of course, because there is to be fair, I have to say something that somehow, and you probably experienced it, and I guess that is quite different from the USA or Canada or other country, is that because of this level of formality, something that is good for you is that sometimes those interactions, they almost feel like theater, because it's always the same lines. Always. It's like, it's kind of strange. It's like at the boulangerie, it's like always, they ask you for the same thing, like, qu'est-ce que je vous sers? Et avec ceci, ce sera tout. It's always the same lines that come up. So that could also help, to know, and it's it seems strange. Like, for instance, I just came back from New Zealand, where I spent 3 months, and people are really laid back. They're very décontracté. We say in French, like chilled, and they will speak with no formality at all. They speak to you as if you are like a really good friend already, and and so the interaction, they vary. It's always different. They will ask about your jumper, where you bought it, and this doesn't really happen much when you go to la boulangerie, la fromagerie, or
it's like where I'm from. It's like the southern U.S. and New Zealand. Like when I first went to New Zealand, it was like it felt like home with a different accent. But please continue.
Yeah, but so yes, to get ready for those typical lines, because we have way to ask, typical sentences. So this could really help, because also the structure they will reapply in different situations. So this will help you, and to know the specific, just for you to feel the form and really take the time to do it calmly, and to get like kind of used to like the words of the forms, and that will really help you for this live interaction. Of course, what your question was, why is that so stressful? It's because paperwork, our legal situation, it's kind of one of the most basic need we have, to have a legal statute in the country where we reside, and that touch to something actually one of the most fundamental need, like in terms of if you take the pyramid of needs, it's like
Maslow's hierarchy of need.
Yeah, so it's kind of, to have food, but also to be able to, like, not to mess up with your visa, for instance, or not to mess up with your carte vitale, the healthcare, the health card. You don't want to make mistakes. So I understand that it's very important and there is things at stake. But I also feel that, it is possible to be empowered and not to have the need, to feel that you don't need to rely on a relocation agency or, someone that you would pay. I think you can do it by yourself, and especially as you do now. Maybe in one video you could share your tips, how you do to get ready for a special meeting, and because I think that's quite important. And maybe you can just like gather all the information, practice. And that's the kind of things that I do. Actually, I'm developing a course, because I observe with all my one-to-one classes, I always observe the same needs. People ask me, okay, now I've got this special event or this special meeting. I need to be ready. Can we go through that? I just rent a new apartment. I have to deal with the electricity, internet. How do we do it? And together with my students, we do, those typical dialogues, and we do like exercises so they are very like grounded. Everything we learn is like, I mix the very situation of the bureaucracy, or, it could also be like something social, like an apéro with French people, with les voisins, the neighbors. I don't know if you already know your voisin, but those little interaction that you could have in your day-to-day life, and to ground it and to actually, with the situation, to have like typical dialogues according to what could happen. And my students been telling me what happened, so I kind of have a lot of data of what could potentially happen to an American that moved to Nice or to Aix-en-Provence, and I use the real places. I use the real restaurants, and I always ask my students, tell me, what do you do? What's your life? And they feed me with all these informations, and then I could create the specific exercises, dialogues, and flashcards to revise, and and right now, because I've been doing so much one-to-one and some group classes, right now I decided, because my time is limited, and I decided to gather all of that, to structure it, and I'm building this course where I mix this life situation that you mentioned before with French learning for beginners. It's a course for beginners. It's a self-paced course, so people will learn by themselves, but with some coaching. So I have like this monthly coaching where we will go through the course together. But the idea is like because it also goes with this idea of empowering. So they have all this data and they will like learn in their own time. What you mentioned before is trying to kind of facilitate with kind of this teacher perspective, like what should you know? What French lines you should know for this situation?
A lot of the discomfort people have is textbook French is not daily spoken real life French. And so what are some of the things, my question to you is like, what are some things you might say that you might coach people to say to be more comfortable, to buy themselves a little bit of time, but buy themselves some grace in an interaction.
Yes. And dignity, like, to be able to just say the most basic thing. I think it's the same as you mentioned, like the basic introductions of, yourself. Like, for instance, je suis retraité, I'm a retiree, to just mention like your statue, who you are, or je viens de Los Angeles, I'm from Los Angeles, like to be able to say like the basic things about who you are, those lines, and also to ask those questions back, to be able, here we speak more about the connection part, because after there is also like, the surviving part, asking where the toilets are and où sont les toilettes, or, the directions. But in terms of, as you mentioned before, like, introductory aspect about being able to say who you are and to get to know, to grasp those concepts and to get to know as well those codes. There is something we didn't mention. I wanted to say it before, like when you mentioned formality, is also something that you first learn when you begin with French, is either to say tu or to say vous. Because in English, it's easier. You just have the you, you. But in French, we have two different you. We have the one that is informal and the one that's more formal. So it's like kind of a fine art to decide which one to use. And there is also a moment where, for instance, in terms of relation, there is some sort of level of hierarchy. Like, let's say, for instance, I have a boss. It's not true. I don't have a boss these days, but imagine I have a boss. And so for sure, the boss needs to be vous voyez. Vous voyez, it's the verb. We have to use vous to speak to my boss. But the person that's supposed to be in a higher rank is the one that has to give the green light. And if he gives the green light and say, hey, on se tutoie. On se tutoie. We should use tu together. Then you usually we say we, but sometimes it's hard because we are so formal. And even if someone said to us, should we use tu? Sometimes it's hard. I have, like, especially me.
You have the vous hardwired as a response for the authority figure or the boss.
Exactly. I will tell you something funny, but for me, for instance, when I see an older man with a mustache, it is really hard for me to say tu for some reason. I find it really difficult because in my head, I associate it with authority figure, and it's really hard for me to use the tu. But yeah, usually there is like this person that will give the green light. And like, for instance, in a class, maybe the teacher, we are supposed to say vous to a teacher. So sometimes at the beginning, I say to my student, okay, what do you want to do? Should we use tu? And also I say, if it's more useful for you to use vous in our class, because that's the vous that you are likely going to use in your life, maybe we should keep the vous. And it depends on the style of everyone. If you are a formal person in your own language, maybe you should keep using the vous in France because that's who you are. If you are from the south of the States like you, and you are like more like sunshine people, like you will want to use tu to feel the proximity. When you go to the south of France, same story. It applies to every country. There is a Montesquieu is a French writer, and he wrote a book that connects climate with the personalities, and to find that living more in the sun and people are warmer, and it applies in France. If you go, like, I'm from the south, not French Riviera, I'm southwest, and it's true, like we are very friendly, like I don't know, we chat easily, and I would tend to break the wall of vous. Usually I tend to do it quite easily.
There was a phrase that I heard versions of when someone would be maybe what would seem, in our language today, like overly informal. But there was a phrase, it's too hot to be too fancy.
Yeah.
Like it's too hot to be that fancy. Let's just talk like regular people,
Yeah, something that I found in order to to deal better with those interactions every day, it will happen often that you will be you won't understand something. Like I don't know, the French person has spoken fast. He has done liaison. He used some words that you don't know, and you are like in a bit of a stressful moment. You don't understand and you don't know what to say. So often people say, "Pouvez-vous répéter?" Plus doucement, s'il vous plaît. That's what the go-to things you learn. But what I found is that you will stay stuck in the same situation because the French person, your interlocutor, will keep repeating the same thing. He will still say the same sentence again and again. But then you won't catch it. Maybe he said it in such a way that you don't understand, or maybe it was this very word that you didn't understand. So what I found is that instead of saying "Pouvez-vous répéter plus doucement, s'il vous plaît?" instead say what you understood. So you could say like what you grasp, and you say, you just repeat what you grasp, what you understood, and then that will give some elements to your speaker, to your interlocutor. Okay, yeah, that's not what I meant, and he will find a way to say it differently. Your experience with the language will completely vary according to your interlocutor. Let's say that you speak to someone that never traveled, that never had an English-speaking friend, that never been to the US or to, I don't know, someone that, let's say in the deep countryside of French, someone like in the older year that never, practice English. That will be harder, of course. And the person as well is not used to foreigners. So like, yes, maybe there is some stubbornness. She will repeat the same way. But if you give elements that could help the person to orientate the discussion or to orientate what she's been saying to you in another way, then that will facilitate the communication. So that's like a little tip, instead of saying, "Pouvez-vous répéter?" just say what you understood. Or even if it's just one word, a key word that you understood. And then, it's about communication. It's about, you will learn how to become a communicator. And I find that the experience of the students don't depend on their command of the language, which is really strange, but it depends on their command on communication often. Like how good of a communicator are you? How flexible you are willing to be to say your idea. All of that in the end, yes, the grammar, the language itself, it's important. I don't want to say that it's not, but in the end, your ability to be flexible, find another idea, find another way to say it, dare, have the spirit of a beginner, and keep being curious and to keep wanting to learn. Have your little notebook, ask the French people, what did you say? Can you write it, please? To cultivate this spirit. I don't know if you have, because usually we have the spirit when we first arrive. Sometimes it fades away. I don't know if you still have this spirit in your day-to-day life.
It comes and goes. It comes and goes. I definitely have the spirit to be confident in any situation is the goal. And of course that's actually a high goal, like any situation. But that seems like what we're talking about is having confidence to try. I'm not afraid to speak with errors. And I have different ways of saying in French, I'm sorry, I speak French like a very small child, and also a little humor,
yes.
Helps to diffuse.
That's important.
But what are some other ways that you might suggest that people build up their confidence and, by finding a way to function? Do you think it's better to aim for correctness versus actual communication, and how do you sort of continually calibrate that, or how do you suggest students and learners calibrate that balance between trying to be really, really correct and just trying to be understood.
As a teacher, and I think if some teachers listen to us today, they will relate. You are amazed to see the differences between students, like in terms of this as you mentioned, this confidence and this ability to speak. Like there is such a gap, and my goal as a teacher is to wonder, so what makes a successful student, someone that will manage to be happy in his communication and be able to communicate better? Why does he succeed more? And I often try to understand those strategies, like what does a person do, like, because everyone has even unconscious strategies, to be able to speak and to converse. And I think it's a lot about perfectionism. And, often the students that come to me, people who decide to move from the US or from other English speaking country to France, they have a life of, work accomplishments. They've been, in the US, you are, hard workers from my European perspective. And usually people work hard and they want to master what they've been doing, everything they do, whether if it's a specific sport or a hobby or work. Usually I find that there is a tremendous amount of work and mastering. Maybe it's just my perspective. And I find that
I think it's very true. It's very true. There's a lot of pride in working hard, doing well.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think maybe people will take the language the same way, and but they will realize, ooh la la, it's a bit harder than what I anticipated. And
except
then
you won't say ooh la la, but yes.
Ooh la, but maybe you will, because you embrace the.
If you've been in France long enough, maybe you will. My friend's daughter said that totally out of a foreigner child who's living in France now has been in the crash, and they saw something that surprised them, and they were like ooh la la.
The fact that often the people that come to me are people, high achiever people, who are quite perfectionist. And I think that creates the tension, the friction, because maybe the language is a bit harder. Maybe you won't be able to, to comply, to achieve your goal. So because you don't know how to conjugate this very verb, or you don't know all the vocabulary that theoretically this situation will require. So you put this stress upon yourself. And I think this is where like the work on confidence is important, is to say you are enough. What you know is enough. Well, I mean, if you are a complete beginner, zero, you need to learn the basic a little bit.
Need a little bit more.
To know, like, it's possible. And, even I have to say, like, even for this, if you don't know anything, you are still a human and you still know how to do like non-verbal communication, so just to empower people to say, like, okay, well, you decided to move to France. Maybe you underestimated the importance of learning the language, or maybe you decided to move, like when I moved to China, I just had the job offer and I had zero time to prepare myself. So, for some people, it might be the same situation. Maybe they wanted to move to Italy, they learned Italian, and last minute they decided to come to France, and so they had zero preparation about the language, or maybe they did something to prepare themselves, like Duolingo, and they realized that the app didn't teach them much also. So maybe sometimes they underestimated the amount of work to do. The way of learning a language, there is a method, it's like it's a bit hard to pick up things from here and there. Sometimes it's hard to build like a little routine. So you need a bit of maybe orientation, and to work on this mindset that yes, you are enough, and you will be able to connect, and you can connect by being flexible and by you just communicate. And also you mentioned the humor, and just I find that in the end, the way French people will react is a bit of a reflection of who you are. And I'm amazed to see that a lot of my students, they say that they have only positive things to say about French people. And as you mentioned, it's far from this image of rudeness that sometimes French people are accused of. And it's just to say, but this also depends of who you are. Like if you have this big smile, if you look at people in the eyes, if you like show that you want to try, and even if you have like this broken accent, and you know, like it's like me. Look at me. I'm speaking to you right now. I'm on YouTube, even though I have this terrible French accent. That took me a bit of courage. That took me a lot of courage to do that, you know. And I received some critiques, you know, on YouTube, and I'm like, that's okay. It's part when you decide to be online on YouTube, you will for sure receive some critique, but it's like, my goal is to communicate and to connect. Exactly. And I know that I can do it. And like, just go back to that, to your intention, you know, like, the intention is to connect, and is also, of course, to survive and to handle the practical day-to-day situation. But, like to just kind of break down those layers of self-judgment, those layers of fear, of shame, and just like go back to what is your intention, what's your goal, and do not, as you mentioned, do not fear those mistakes. They are part of the journey. Mistakes are your friends. That means that you can improve them, and just, you know, cultivate this beginner spirit of like lifelong learner. And we are here to learn. And that is so beautiful. It is amazing that because you are as well, maybe some people come to France and they're retired, so they have time technically. So it's like, this is an opportunity for you to open your mind, and even to learn feminine, masculine for the first time in your life. If you didn't learn Spanish or if you didn't learn a Latin language, it's fun. It's kind of makes you feel like, oh, it's strange, like, but it's like it's new concepts in your world.
For Susie, being a native Chinese speaker, they don't have gendered language. You know, the pronoun for he and she and it is all the same. It's all the same word. And so you have to learn. Yeah. And to a native Chinese speaker, they understand, you know, in context, any Chinese speaker in a group can follow what's being said. And in this sentence is referring to he, that one's referring to she, and that's referring to it over here. And the question started with, is focusing on correctness or focusing on actually effective communication more important? And I think we understand that it's important to try to be correct, but ultimately you need to be understood, even if people understand that you're not very fluent yet. What do you think some of the biggest cultural mismatches are, you know, that make foreigners, expats think that it's a language issue, but it's actually like French communication norms, like French cultural standards?
It's interesting because the language and the culture are completely intertwined. So you find that it's a bit of a mix of everything, but it depends are we speaking mostly with Americans, right? Americans, because I guess if you're someone from
majority
UK,
of our audience are American, a lot of UK and some French people in France, at least geographically, but they're probably fellow foreigners.
I think one of the things at first that could be a little bit strange is the way that American sorry for that, but the French people, les Français, think that Americans are like overly nice, like always like giving like really like really good compliments and being like on it always. And for us, for French people, sometimes, well, depends if you are, as we mentioned, from Paris or from La Province. Province is all the people that are not from Paris, like me. I'm from the south. So I'm as well like someone that's like, you know, complimenting and being like kind of very positive. And I'm not like this kind of cold French person. But often Americans are regarded by, there is French people think that if you over compliment, especially if someone that you don't know, that is fake. We think that that's not authentic. It cannot be
it's
authentic.
Insincere. Yeah.
Yeah. It's important to also be aware of it, when you learn the language and when you, maybe you want to translate, you want to say the same thing. And I think it's important that you remain yourself because you are from America and that's what you do, but also be aware that maybe if you overdo it, like for instance, when we are in the restaurant, yes, it's possible we could say to the waiter, "C'était délicieux," that was delicious, but sometimes like people kind of we don't give like this maximum compliment. We kind of just say things as they are, plain, and sometimes it's even a little bit nonchalant. It's a little bit like we kind of undersay it. Like
instead of saying that was great, they say that's not bad.
Voilà, c'est pas mal. Ouais. Well, I wouldn't say that to the waiter. It would be a little bit rude. But to my friend with who I'm in the restaurant, maybe we will say, "Ça c'est pas mal, ça va." That's all right. But maybe we won't like be like super in this emphasis, like, oh, it was so good. So that's one of the things, like one of those cultural contrasts between America and France. I don't know. Did you feel it in France?
I definitely, I'm aware of it, and it's a recurring theme in some of the comments on some of our videos that where that comes up. And I'm happy that we have not just foreigners who are in France, but we have a lot of French people who watch the channel for whatever reason. I'm glad you're here. It seems to be a theme that they're French who often have been expats someplace else, or they are currently expats. So they're just looking at their situation in reverse, But there will be a lot of French commenters who will discuss those sorts of issues, and give some context for it. And there's some people who've commented who watch the channel who, I'm French and I live in, the US or Canada, or I live this place. And they will talk about how they've had to retrain themselves for the culture that they're now in.
Yes.
To me, that's been one of the most important mindsets is to be able to work on adapting. And still, I am who I am, I'm not going to change at a fundamental level, but in terms of how I communicate or interact. And again, I've already had the experience of doing that in a completely alien culture, in China. So I was already, France felt much more like coming home than moving to a foreign country.
Of course. Yeah. You went it was the same for me in China. You are analphabet. You don't know what is a restaurant. You can't, read anything. So it's kind of hardcore in terms of cultural shock because it feels like kind of chaotic, and you really have to have some
It is
sort
kind of chaotic.
Yeah.
It feels like that because
I personally love it, but I know that for some people, like I know like a lot of my students, for them, this jump to live their life. A life that they have built, they always stayed in their hometown and they decide because they want to, they said, that's enough. Now this is my chapter. I want to start something new. And I always dreamt of going abroad. Maybe they have like some ancestor, because in the end, often American people, they have those roots from Europe, and it's like part of their dream. Often that's what I found with my students, is like they want to start a new chapter. And yes, those cultural shock, cultural differences are part of it. But it's I'm really in awe with like the boldness and the courage that takes. And I think it's something to be said as well, because I often find that a lot of people, they feel that their family and friends, they don't understand all that represents. And I think that's why you have a YouTube channel, and that's why a lot of expats speak about it, because that requires a lot of adaptation skills, courage to start with a white page, and to also to realize that, okay, maybe you will have a lot of expat friends, but if it's not the case, if you just dive into the French pool, maybe like to accept that people won't know you for who you truly, for who you are in the US. They won't know all your, they won't grasp your humor, or, all this knowledge you have in this very thing, or like your wittiness. They won't see that in you. And sometimes it's kind of, oh, I wish they could see who I am. And, you go through that, but you will get there eventually. You will be able to, to learn a few French jokes and make them laugh, and you will recreate something. And that's the beauty of it, is that it is something new as well that you are going to build. There is like a part of you that will it's transformation. You are transforming yourself, and I think that's why you are here. That's why maybe there is some people they had to come for some reason. Everyone has his own reason. But I'm pretty sure a lot of people, they come abroad because they just wanted a change, and they wanted a change within themselves, learning the language, learning, this culture, and it's the way to do it. And it's very exciting, I think. But something else that came in mind to answer to your former question is also the complaint now, because before I say something about the American, now I say something about the French, but you already know that, I think. But we do complain a lot, and it's really no. Se plaindre is the French verb. On se plaint. Like for instance, there is a line that you should know. It's one with the liaison, so it's j'en ai marre. Do you know? Have you heard this one? J'en ai marre.
I've heard of that. And what's
J'en ai marre. So it means I have enough. I have enough of it. J'en ai marre. J'en ai marre.
Right, okay.
It's kind of a very slang sentence, but you will hear it a lot. J'en ai marre. Non, mais j'en ai marre.
Yeah, I've heard it a lot. I've never said it to my knowledge. I've heard it, and I think that's what I. That's what I thought it meant, basically. Yeah.
Do you know the musician Johnny Marr? Johnny Marr?
Sure. Johnny Marr from the Smiths?
Yes. So you can think of Johnny Marr, J'en ai marre, J'en ai marre, Johnny Marr. I don't know. It's not exactly the same, but if you want a reference.
I love that reference. I don't know how many people are fans of 80s British pop, but Johnny Marr.
Yeah, Johnny Marr. Just sometimes you need the reference to remember.
That's a French person. That's a French person saying Johnny Marr.
Yeah, exactly.
that's how a French person would say his name. That's funny.
Yeah. So, we complain a lot, but it is, I don't think I complain a lot, but maybe just being French, but I lived abroad for a long time. So my identity changed. So maybe I became less French by being abroad. And when they do, sometimes maybe for you, it will be a bit of a downer, or you are not too used to it, but keep in mind that it's kind of part of it, and people actually bond. They connect by complaining.
Well, I think that's true in other cultures as well. I mean, I've seen that the different places I lived in the U.S. You complain to your friends. It's you share what they call you have a troubles talk, where you talk about the troubles in life, with your close friends, and it's certainly a focus of Chinese society as well, that people, people really hash it out. And I think French people have, it's well known worldwide that if French people are not happy, they will not be quiet about it.
If
French people are unhappy, they will not be quiet about it. When we wrap up, I'm going to ask you some very actionable tips, but before we get into that, I do want to go just a little bit deeper on something that is a core part of who you are in your practice. And it's something that I think we have in common, which is your focus on being an integrated human being here. I mean, to me, the bigger issue is about being in touch with who you are and where you are. The mindfulness aspects of this, for lack of a more specific thing to focus on. Like mindset wise, how do you talk to people to make them comfortable? Because again, it's one thing to learn grammar and vocabulary and to role play scenarios, but deeper than that. You're trying to instill a sense of confidence and an openness to learning. This will get into a bit of therapy talk, so apologies to anybody who doesn't like that. But I think that's important, and you're the guest, and I've got a unique opportunity to ask you those sorts of questions. How do you integrate that mindfulness and meditative background and spiritual background? How do you integrate that into your approach to helping people?
It's a really good question. Merci. So first of all, I decided to create, that's how I started my YouTube channel. At the beginning, I created a lot of meditation specific for when you freeze and when you speak, like how to, combat the fatigue, mental fatigue, when all those meditation to feel confident. And the idea when I was making those meditation was just to kind of, as I mentioned before, to wire the brain in a different way, to kind of feel like, to develop this element of, confidence and safety, because I believe that it's possible to have this kind of discipline and to change the way things work right there in terms of the emotions. So that's why I thought the meditation could be handy. I know that for some people, maybe they never did it before and it's a bit wonky. Like, how do you say woohoo or
woo-woo? Yeah, woo-woo. Yeah. For some people it is, but
I mean, don't call it meditation. You can just, you don't need to sit down formally, and
right.
You can
you
just
don't have to get into full
it.
lotus and
yeah, exactly.
You don't have to burn incense if that's not your thing.
Just to, kind of, say, okay, I accept, I'm calm, I'm confident. All the things that we've been saying that this is my opportunity to grow, to relearn, to learn new things, and I want this joy, and I open my mind, and the mistakes are my friends, and it doesn't matter, and I'm here to have a good time, build a new life, connect, and just to wire yourself. And I think a lot of Americans that I know and a lot of my students, they have such a good experience because they have this positive mindset, because they practice, the gratefulness and just to replug your mind like that. I think that is essential. And I mentioned before in one of your earlier questions, this rigidity that a lot of us have. I come from very far personally. I used to be so rigid. And I think here the advice is not only for language, but for public speaking in general. So I remember where I'm from in a lifetime ago, when I was like a very young person. Every time I would speak aloud, I would have interaction. I had so much judgments, I would judge myself for not being enough, not saying the right thing. And, it's like those self-judgment thing that you can have. And not only when you speak another language, but even when you speak your own language, sometimes it can happen. But that's where, for me, meditation played because I in another lifetime, I lived in a Buddhist center, and I traveled in Asia through, to go through the steps of the Buddha and meditate. And because I discovered that this act of, not judging your thoughts and not judging this inner voice and letting it go, letting it pass, suddenly I developed a lot of tenderness towards myself. And I know maybe this vocabulary will be strange for some people, but it's like accepting who you are right now and being kind with yourself, and also reminding yourself that what you do is amazing. It's brave, and you are deciding to start anew, and maybe sometimes later in life, and focusing on this aspect, like, yes, I'm proud of what I'm doing. Everything is new. The language is new, and I'm just doing it. And that's all good, to focus on this aspect. And I think by plugging yourself towards those, those kind of inner chat. And I think you can kind of train yourself to become less rigid and to be able finally to express your very idea, to connect with this French person and to make the French person smile and for you to smile back and to come back home happy of this interaction rather than coming back home so sad because you froze and you just spoke English because you didn't dare and, So I think this is completely possible and you'd be surprised. I'm a French teacher, but you'd be surprised to see how much the mindset plays, how much, that has a lot of impact. So yes, the language, the knowledge has an importance, but the mindset is also very much, especially later in life. When you already made such a big move and all the stress is there because it's exciting, but it's also stressful to move abroad. So working on, feeling safe, I think that's that could be very useful for you.
Deborah, I'm smiling and laughing because going into this, selfishly, we could have just spent an hour talking about those sorts of things, and I would feel very personally satisfied. And I think a lot of people watching hopefully resonate with that. But I would be remiss as an interviewer speaking to a French language instructor as your sort of primary identity if I didn't ask you just for some practical tips for people who aren't into the woo-woo like me and you. And maybe this touches on some woo-woo things as well, your answers, but I want to ask you some tools and habits, some things like little actionable things you might recommend to people who are attempting to learn French and get better integrated in living in France. Is there a specific daily habit that you think gives much bigger results than the effort? Is there one thing you think people should do every day?
Thank you for asking that. And I believe that it's the same for everything, but it is better to develop a short daily routine rather than, I will do 2 hours of French on the weekend. I think it's good to already inject French language in your day-to-day life, because you are either still in your home country and you prep your move, or you are already in France. I think there is different kind of people who are listening to us, but regardless, especially nowadays with this very screen in front of you, there is so much free things out there and things that can empower you to build this habit, and you can do it. You can have a self-paced, like a routine that you can do on your own, and that's completely possible for you to create a daily immersion in French language. Even if you are in the US, in the UK, it is possible. You could, for instance, as well, put the parameter of your phone, only if you're all good with the phone. But you could put the parameters, for instance, in French. You can kind of create this kind of French environment. You can put the French radio in the background. If you used to listen radio, even if you don't understand, if you understand the very, very little amount, but just to get used to the melody of it, you can put a GPS, those GPS that we have. It's possible to put it, if for instance, you can go to a place you already know, because we don't want you to get lost, and put the GPS in French, just to get to know. Tournez à droite, tournez à gauche, continuez jusqu'au boulevard, to get to know, those lines, and to create like an immersion through those digital tools that we have. It's completely possible. And as well, online, there is a lot of free websites where you can find awesome content, and you could say to yourself, okay, every day I will do some exercises on this very blog. To name a few, there is RFI, Radio France Internationale, where you have some news in slow French. Do you know this website?
I listen to it, and I listen to Radio FIP.
FIP.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, FIP is really
and I'll
nice.
link some of these things in the video description so people can track them down. So what are some other ones that you like?
as you mentioned, like you went to FIP because you like music, and so do it as well with what you like. If you like house hunting, watch some YouTube video in French about this very French show that does house hunting. Find the bridges. Who you are in your home country, and try to find this very French content. What, as a teacher, I call it, the way we call it is document authentique. Like authentic documents are those documents that are not made for you, the learners, but they are made for the common French person. But nowadays, I know that there is a lot of apps that you can actually, I think it's Lingopier is one of them. They actually contacted me to do a partnership, but I haven't answered yet. But they can you can plug them with some YouTube channel or whatever, and they actually translate every word. And I think there is plenty of apps now that do that. They put the translation. There is a dictionary, and even on YouTube, listen to YouTube video. If it's too hard, you can change the parameter and put sometimes it sounds a bit artificial, but it's quite good.
But change the speed, change the speed to where you can hear it,
Exactly.
So 75% speed or something.
Yeah, because sometimes in some situation, French people speak really fast. So it's a way of, slowing things down. There is a website that I like as well. It's Euronews. So it's a European news website. And I like because the piece of news are quite small. It's like 3 minutes, 2 minutes, and you could watch them. And I always advise first, try to watch without subs or just to use your ears. And then if you want second time, because it's only 2 or 3 minutes, you can watch it and read the transcriptions. So there is a lot of websites like that where they have the transcriptions. But then you also have websites specifically for learners. So that's something else. They are not authentic documents, but they are websites for learners. Like there is TV5 Monde, an international French channel, but they have a part of it dedicated for the learners of French language. And they also have an app, and they give a lot of very well done, like they're good exercises, and there is, all those YouTube channels are amazing. You can really go through like different parts. Like I think Americans are quite fond of French with Alexa. She's kind of very famous.
She's great. She's huge. Yes, my wife Susie loves her channel too. Specifically.
So there is a lot out there, lot of different channel, but pick something that works for you, or like some news in slow French, or like there is a lot of content, and I also create on my website. I have this blog where I try to, when my students have a point that's difficult for them, instead of just making homework for them, I turn that into a blog article where I do the exercises, and I try to like feed the blog often, where you have like your exercises. And there is plenty of French teachers that do the same. So online you have so many blogs and websites where you have like really good pedagogical content. There is one, I will give you the link. It's a Dialogue Français Facile. It's kind of old school website. I think it's been there forever. And it's a lot of dialogues out there, very practical like that. And you have like those exercises, and you have the audio. It's really good. And you could say to yourself, okay, every day I go through a dialogue, and it's progressive. You start with A1 level, and then gradually it becomes harder and harder. Then I took this book before that I mentioned. So this is one of the most classic grammatical book, and it's progressive. So like this one is for intermediate level. So you see, you've got one page is the lesson of the day, and the other page is very easy exercises. So if you like to write, and you don't want always to do something with the screen, I feel you. It's good to have, like an actual book. There is also plenty out there. Those ones, the thing is that, there is no English at all. So it's kind of, this immersion kind of way of doing it. It's phrased in a simple way. It starts with the beginning, like, je suis, like I am, very simple things. But it is quite good if you want like some grammatical grounding. And if you want, okay, every day I do 1 page of the book, that could be something. So define how much time you want to dedicate, something smart, like doable, like achieve something you could achieve. And then use also your personal interest, things that you like. If you like music like you, go to this very podcast in French and that speaks about music or something like that. And also do some grammar, and I will give you some websites and also the website I mentioned, because it's also important to know, the basics, or how the negation work. Oh, there is 2 words of negation. There is the ne and there is the pas. Where do we locate them? To know those basic rules. And if you need the support of English, there is also, like I do it on my website, and there is a lot of websites specifically for English learner, and that gives you the support of English, especially at the beginning. Create something like that. Develop the immersion. I know a lot of people like the app and the gamification. This is also something that it's good to get to know the basic vocabulary and to keep you starting. But I think it wouldn't be, I think you mentioned that in some of your videos.
Yeah. I mean, Duolingo was great for plugging in a couple thousand words of vocabulary and some very basic grammar. But, I've pretty much lost my, I still have my daily streak, but I mean, I put in the most minimal effort with it because
I think at the very beginning, it's good at the very, very beginning to get to know your first words. And if you, for instance, start a class with a teacher, like you will know the basic, like un homme, une femme, like a man, a woman, the basic, and you get to, to repeat. But yeah, if you do those apps, and whatever you do, even when you watch a video, speak like a parrot, have the parrot attitude, like don't be scared to speak out loud. And this makes such a difference, like to the playfulness, to develop this playfulness. And hopefully by doing that, you will start to also have this enthusiasm. And like, I think naturally you will want to do it. You will want to learn more, and maybe your routine could become longer, and maybe you'll start watching, for instance, there is in the US they have a France Channel. I think it's like the Netflix of French movies.
Right.
Do you know this?
I'm aware of it. Yeah, I'm aware of it.
I have a student that signed up, and she said it's amazing because you got all those documentaries, movies, and it's part of her routine now to watch things in French. And at the beginning, you would do it maybe with English sub, and then you change to French sub, and then you don't put sub at all. So you will have like different steps, and maybe at the beginning you could start with a movie maybe that or if you want to read a book, start maybe with a book that
as a filmmaker, I really hate to listen to dubbed films, even if I don't know the language of the film. I want to listen in the original language, but it is a useful language learning trick. Like a movie, like a film, especially that I know inside and out, and that like I could do all the lines myself. Like the movie Argo, I love the movie Argo. And because we live in France and we have in our cable system, I have the French. Sometimes I only have the French version of things available, but there's almost always the French dub version. So I'll put on something that I know inside and out, and I'll listen to the dubbed version on purpose, so that I have to my filmmaker happiness, I have to set that aside, but I'm there to learn French. And so I'll listen to it and I'll hear, and often, of course, it's not a direct translation. It's an interpretation. Especially with like jokes and insults. So someone says a certain thing, it's not a literal translation, it's an interpretation. And here's the French way to say that, or here's a French way to say that particular thing. And so, and it's a lot of the little phrases, and then go out into the wild, go out into the real world. And then all of a sudden I'm realizing, oh yeah, this little thing that friends say between each other to give each other like a playful hard time. It's like, oh yeah, this is what that's what they're saying.
No, it's good to the way you do it to take what you love the most, like cinema. I mean, France is kind of you see, you must have now know like how we have like those independent. There was the ceremony of the César recently where Jim Carrey actually spoke in French.
I watched that. I watched that last night actually.
Ah, it was fun, no? Like the ceremony.
I saw the clip of him. I would love to watch the entire César presentation.
To go back to your question, you ask what can be done practically. So yes, create a routine. It depends if you are in your home country or in France, but have something simple, doable to plug your mind with French, but also connected with the reality of the life outside of the house. In the house, you can already be in immersion with all those things. But outside of the house, if you are, let's say, in San Francisco, go to the Alliance Française, the Institut Français, or for instance, there is a meetup application where there is a group of Francophiles and you could meet up with them for a coffee. You could take French classes as well, but if you want to do something that's not officially, a class, you can actually just connect yourself or go to watch French movie in original version, like those kind of things that you can find in your town. Try to connect yourself with the French, everything French, or this French bakery where you could go in San Francisco or wherever you live. There is always like some sort of French things, and there will be this French expats that will serve you, and you could practice with her. And in Paris, or like where you live, or when you are in France, you could also go to sign up to what you like, to pottery class, and then that would be like a very passive way of learning, like you will actually step by step every time. And it was the same for me when I lived in China. I was going to yoga every day and I started to learn the number with the breathing, and it's very grounded in your life. So, I think that will be, really good to do. And even if you hesitate and you are reluctant, you are like, oh, but I won't understand the thing, but just do it. Like go sign up for this class, even if it's all in French, and it will be a free language class in a way. And you can, you won't get to do the grammar, but you will meet up with this very French person, and you will create this relationship, and it will, every time you will search for words before going, the same way you prep yourself for the bureaucracy, and then it will become, a good opportunity to improve your language skills. So I think that would be something also to be dare going out there, dare connecting yourself with the language. Maybe find a language partner. There is plenty of websites. I don't know if you ever had that language exchange.
I did that in Chinese a long time ago. Yeah. Yeah, it's very useful. It's very useful. Someone's trying to learn. You're trying to learn each other's native languages. Yes. And so they can speak your language, you speak their language, and then you correct each other as you go. And it can be very effective. And I love your idea of basically, pay for the yoga class, get a French class for free.
I think so.
At least the French related to a yoga class, for instance.
Yeah. So. And actually there is a lot of thematical French classes as well. I know in Paris there is they organize this. There is, I think it's a group of French teachers. They organize those movie projection in French, and there is a little chat. They give away vocabulary. And I think nowadays there is a lot of book clubs in French, and like every month we read a book, and but this is more for more intermediate level, maybe like you.
Right. Well, Deborah, look, I absolutely love this conversation with you. I think that you really touch on a lot of things that I'm aware of, and some of it I've put into formal language, and some of it's just that I know is that, moving countries isn't just a logistical matter. It's neurological and emotional and relational. And I think you do a really great job of integrating that into actually teaching French and talking about learning French. So I really appreciate you being a guest here today.
I appreciate you inviting me, and I hope that could make people feel more confident. And I really encourage the kindness because I know that sometimes there is a lot of judgment when it comes to languages, and that's what as well. It's kind of the mindset sometimes we had at school, and I just want people to like. Have a safe space and feel that they can actually have a lot of joy and they can really enjoy the process of speaking French, creating connections, and that will be a little effort goes a long way, I think. So I encourage you to dare speaking, oser parler.
C'est bon. Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup.